Okay, so this is lecture number 13, Pathwork. And the name of the lecture is Positive Thinking, Right and Wrong Kind. In the name of the Lord, I greet you, my friends, and I bring you his blessing. There are many people, when they come in contact with God, with absolute truth, with the spirit world, they believe this experience, the certainty of all this, can come to them by staggering proof they personally receive. But my friends, it cannot happen this way. When you desire this kind of proof, you thus think you can eliminate your doubts which are in themselves understandable enough. However, your doubts can never disappear by the sort of proofs you hope for. Doubt is the opposite of faith. And faith, my friends, is nothing else in reality than the experience, the certainty of all that you may doubt presently. It is the inner experience. And inner experience cannot come into existence by outer happenings. So, we are dealing here with two entirely different levels of consciousness. To accomplish something within you, you have to prepare, and therefore also the inner respective conditions. Let me read that again. To accomplish something within you, you have to prepare. Therefore also the inner respective conditions by finding and conquering your inner blocks, hurdles, obstacles. In short, everything that stands in your way to faith in its true meaning. Let us suppose you would receive the kind of proof you hope for without your inner obstacles being removed by yourselves first. At the moment, you would certainly be impressed. You might say, "Indeed, this is strange. This is wonderful. It is astounding." Yet, after this first effect has worn off, the doubts existing within you would come to the surface again. You would say to yourselves, perhaps the medium knew about it. Or at the best, you might say, all of this was a coincidence. So you see, when outer occurrences are not substantiated within, the greatest outer effect must wear off or fade out after a while, because these two levels of perception can never replace one another. They can only be integrated by the steady growth of inner development. Experience of absolute truth is like a living organism. It cannot come to you by the most miraculous outer happenings. It can only be nursed, cared for, developed like any living organism. Also, physical growth happens slowly, but surely, step by step. And you hardly notice the growth while it is going on, but all of a sudden, you discover the preceding gradual development. So it is thus with all physical growth, not a bit different with spiritual or emotional growth. Any seeming shortcut has never any lasting effect and is therefore a farce. Shortcuts, sudden measures supposed to eliminate the effort of setting slow growth in motion, is in accordance with the laws of the powers of darkness. Their ways are immediately very effectual, very quick, but they're never, ever, ever lasting. While slow growth and development is in accordance with the divine law. I love this. And must be eventually crowned by success. Therefore, it would be good for all of my friends who find themselves in this position to remember that you cannot come to the kind of faith we are talking about by a single experience, astounding as it may be. But you will obtain this faith by working spiritually, by walking on this path. By walking on this path of perfection, by getting to know yourselves as you really are, by understanding your inner conflicts, finding out in what way you have, being only an emotional reaction, broken the spiritual laws. So let me read that sentence again because it's kind of tricky. But you will obtain faith by working spiritually, by walking on this path of perfection, by getting to know yourselves as you really are. by understanding your inner conflicts and finding out in what way you have, being only an emotional reaction, broken the spiritual laws. Step by step, as you proceed to free yourselves of your inner chains, the doubts will come less and less often. And they will not disappear suddenly, but will recur more and more seldom with less and less strength until they gradually disappear altogether. This is the only way, my friends. Anything given to you merely from the outside would only have a momentary effect, but never, never in the long run. And as I said, this is the law for all divine beings. And anything that is substantial and permanent grows slowly with a maximum of personal effort, little by little. And while it happens, you may not even be aware of the extent in which you and your faith, your experience of the absolute, or your sense for it grows. But not only people at the beginning of this path or on the threshold of it need to know about these facts. For as I have explained, even those already in the process of their proper inner development find themselves occasionally, though less often and with less impact, assailed by their original doubts. For these inevitable times of doubting, I wish to give you some simple advice, my friends, how to go about meeting these doubts. Because most of you know that there are two forces within the human soul. There is the higher self, or the divine spark, the part of man where he strives upwards, that part of man that wishes perfection for the whole human being, complete integration. And in this part, you know all your conscious being doubts, and this part of you wants to convey this knowledge to your consciousness. The other part, the lower self, and this comprises not only your faults and weaknesses, but also your ignorance and all the facets where you consciously or unconsciously break divine law. Where we break divine law is again divided, at least quite often, into two further parts. One fears the certainty of the spiritual world, for knowledge also means responsibility, and man in his lower nature prefers to remain ignorant because thus he is not obliged to conquer his lower self, which is indeed not easy. And the other wishes dearly the truth of all he still doubts. The other wishes dearly the truth of all he still doubts, because difficult as it may be to attain, it means eternal happiness and bliss. Wow, that's interesting. Let me read that sentence again. The other wishes dearly the truth of all that he still doubts, because difficult as it may be to attain, it means eternal happiness and bliss. But the fear in his lower self tells him all this may be an illusion, wishful thinking. So both currents of the lower self, each for his own reasons, try to make man doubt, and the latter in order to avoid disappointment. Therefore, the higher self and the lower self are at war with one another. And whenever there is an inner disharmony, it means that man's two natures are fighting. So whenever doubt reappears, it is the lower self of man speaking. And when the doubt is gone, the higher self is speaking. And then you know that God, his wonderful creation, his spirit world, is truth, where everything is possible, where no unhappiness need ever exist. Let me read that again. When the doubt is gone, the higher self is speaking. And then you know that God, his wonderful creation, his spirit world, is truth, where everything is possible, where no unhappiness need ever exist. But when the lower self is stronger, you believe doubt, despair, hopelessness may be, after all, true. Now, it is just the question for you to settle. Which side is right? Which side is actually the truth? For this is really the question it all boils down to. All you should do while you are in doubt is to retire into quietness. Formulate this argument in clear-cut, concise thought, and ask God the simple question, which is true? Then keep yourself open for the answer. Do not expect that this answer can always be given to you immediately. In the days that follow, just keep aware of it in one way or another, and you will eventually receive it. But actually, the answer is really already settled within you, although you may not know it yet, by the mere fact that when you are in doubt, you are depressed. And when you are in a state of experiencing truth, you feel happy. And the truth must always make you happy, even unpleasant truth. All my friends on the path have experienced this, how they must occasionally encounter unflattering or unpleasant facets within themselves. But when desire for the truth within becomes greater than all else, this unpleasant truth will always strengthen and make you happy. By the same token, if you observe your feelings closely, you will find that untruth, pleasant as it may seem at the moment, never really gives you peace. For deep down, your higher self always has the correct answer. You must feel it. Thus, truth will never depress you, my dear friends. Truth will never depress us. I love that. There you find the answer to the question you have not settled yet when you are in doubt. But if you are not satisfied with your own inner voice that tells you the truth, should you wish additional answers, ask God this question. Formulate your feelings. Which is true? Which is true? I am ready to receive the answer. And I promise you, provided you do not forget about it, you do not put it out of your mind, but in a relaxed and serene way, patiently and yet aware of it, you go about your business and truth will be shown to you. One of the two battling sides within you has the right answer, and even those friends at the beginning of the path may make use of this advice and handle it in the similar way. And when you have overcome the hurdles within you, when you are mature enough to remain in a state of truth, the proofs that you have first wished for, the one purpose of being able to believe, this proof will come to you also from without, not once, but 100 times. But the purpose will not be to make you see reality as it really is. It is to make you convinced, to overcome your doubts. But these proves much more than you ever dreamed possible, and in a much more wonderful way than you ever thought possible, just will come as a natural byproduct of your inner victory. In other words, their purpose is not to convince you, for this is quite impossible anyway, as I have explained, but they are the natural result or part of the result when you walk the path to God. When you do not need this proof anymore, you will receive it abundantly. These incidents will just be an additional confirmation for you, and it will surely make you happy, but it will not represent the condition by which you believe and accept truth. This again is profound wisdom and divine law, and it should not be any different. And now I wish to talk about a much disputed subject among my friends, the subject of positive thinking. Positive thinking is indeed essential for the person who wants to grow spiritually. But unfortunately, it is often misunderstood and wrongly applied. To build clean and proper thoughts according to divine law is, of course, one of the fundamentals because, as you know, your thoughts are reality. They have form and substance. And by unclean thoughts, you build disharmonious forms which must eventually have their effect in your lives and destinies. However, not only thoughts have this effect, but also feelings, emotional reactions, or subconscious thoughts. It is in any case the great temptation of the spiritually and emotionally immature person to put everything uncomfortable into the subconscious where it does infinitely more harm than any conscious thought, be it the worst. For consciously it can be dealt with and met, while it smolders like a time bomb when it is enclosed. For consciously it can be dealt with and met, while it smolders like a time bomb when it is enclosed in the subconscious mind, from where the disharmonious forms build themselves every bit as destructively from conscious thought. The diligent student of the positive thinking principle is therefore often encouraged to do just what is worse for him. He is so concerned by not harboring any negative thoughts that he is inclined to push all negative thoughts existing in him into his subconscious, though disregarding the discrepancy in him, what he wants to think and what he actually thinks or feels. And it should be stressed that thoughts can be controlled by your conscious direction of will, just as your actions can, but your feelings cannot. You cannot directly control your feelings, and you all know that. You may know very well that it is sinful to hate, but when hatred is still in you, you cannot change this inner current. Merely merely because you try to force yourself. Or if you do not love a person, you cannot force yourself to do so as much as you may want to. The change can only be brought about quite indirectly by remote control, if I may use this expression. With every step upwards you take on the path, step by step, your feelings will change automatically, naturally, and gradually. But one of the conditions to bring this about is that you make your subconscious known to your conscious. And to try too hard, the system of positive thinking may just work the other way around and induce you to think superficially what has no actual root in you. And thus you live a lie. Well meant as it may be, this is the most harmful of all things. Therefore, it is imperative to meet what actually still exists in you squarely, face it. And yet, when you are so concerned with this positive thinking, right as it is in the proper way, you fall into danger by your own goodwill, also partly by the side in you that hates to recognize the unpleasant currents within yourselves. That disregards what actually exists in you and locks it up where it will ferment and will work much more against you than if your thoughts would remain conscious. So this is one important factor that you should all remember. Certainly, you should practice positive thinking. Observe your thoughts, but observe quietly, detachedly, in a relaxed way without guilt feelings that your emotions are not always parallel to your thoughts or to the way you want your thoughts and feelings to be. And you have to learn to view your own lower self, accepting its present existence, although it is a temporary one. How temporary depends entirely on yourselves. However, However, it is still a reality on this plane, and you cannot close your eyes to any reality on whatever plane this may be. Another misunderstanding often arises in the principle of positive thinking, or misuse or abuse of positive thinking, is the following. Man wants to be happy, and this is the most natural wish. This wish comes forth from the higher self as well as the lower self. Only the higher self knows that there is a price to be paid. This price is all the effort one has to meet on the path. Self-knowledge, overcoming one's faults, learning the spiritual laws generally, applying them particularly and personally, etc., etc., etc. The lower self, on the other hand, wants to attain happiness by outer means and without the price of conquering itself. And the basis for conquering the lower nature is that so difficult, and the basis for conquering the lower nature is that so difficult self-knowledge, honesty towards oneself, and self-analysis. The lower self, in its pride, wants to be perfect without doing the necessary and often tiresome work for it. So both the higher and the lower self want happiness, but in very different ways. Your higher self knows that only by perfection within can you achieve perfection without. That is happiness. Your lower self is not prepared to pay any price for it. It wants to have cake and it wants to eat it too. If you have difficulties in your life, you will know that they are the result of your lower nature, the result of your breaking divine law in some respect, often in many respects. The mature person has to be prepared to pay this price, to accept the workings of the law, and thus to honor God. And he will not try to get out of paying. However, misapplied or misunderstood positive thinking wants to have outer perfection often too quickly, merely by learning thought control, which is not enough. And thus man's lower nature borrows this principle because it fits very well to what it wants. The first step to true positive thinking is to take the consequences of what he has done at a past time, whether it concerns a previous incarnation or this very same life. The mature person and true follower of positive thinking will say, I have gone against the law, and the effects have to be worked out. This means I have to, among other things, accept these conditions. We often observe people who try very hard to practice positive thinking. But one reason of trying so hard is that subconsciously, and the thoughts not being clearly formulated, in their desire for happiness, Coming from the lower self, they are inclined to quarrel with God and destiny, because difficulties and hardship exist in life. You may absorb intellectually all you want that God did not want. You may absorb intellectually all you want that God did not want your difficulties in the first place, that you yourselves are responsible for it. But emotionally, you have not learned this truth as long as you are not willing to pay. And paying means accepting your difficulties, knowing that they are but temporary. For God is love and wants all his children to be happy. But happiness can only be achieved by, among other things, consciously accepting the laws of cause and effect and trying not to get out of the effect by mere thought control. Happiness cannot come to you as long as you love yourself so dearly that a little pain becomes so terrible that you are unwilling to bear it. And only by accepting this pain can you become detached enough from your own ego that pain will not be necessary anymore for your development. Let me read that again. Only by accepting this pain can you become detached enough from your own ego that pain will not be necessary anymore for your development. That does not mean that you should resign or become hopeless or wallow in your little pains and tribulations. It means that you should be perfectly aware that every difficulty in your life is self-inflicted, and therefore you have to go through it, bear it, accept it, and most important of all, find within you the cause so as to eliminate this cause once and for all. This cause can only be found on the path by self-knowledge. Find the fault in you responsible for your outer hardship. Eliminate this fault. And know that the outer manifestation of the evil root cannot disappear immediately, but has to be dissolved again by the process of slow, organic growth. And as long as this lasts, honor God by accepting his laws. Do not love yourself so much. Do not love yourselves so much that you shirk a little pain, but shoulder it courageously and humbly, not making your own little efforts so important. This is the true and best way to practice positive thinking. For in this attitude, you will be penetrated by the profound conviction that God's world is a happy world in which you have nothing to fear, in which you have so much to look forward to. Your sense of time will gradually change, not only by intellectual knowledge, but by deep feeling, and you will know that the time your little pain lasts is but so short, viewed from the spiritual and only real outlook. You all have heard often, be it from me or others, that not the fact that you have difficulties is important, but how you take these difficulties. And I have shown you how you should meet them. He who wants to win life will lose it. He who is ready to give it up will win. What does that mean, my friends? Exactly what I have just explained. If you are constantly so afraid of the little pain, if you hold on so tightly to your own ego, to your own little sensitivities or vanities, you do not give up your life. You hold on too tightly, and therefore you must lose it. Or to lose in the spiritual sense, in the sense that you cannot find peace, harmony, happiness within or without, but he who does not take himself so seriously, whose comfort in everything pertaining to the ego is not so terribly important, whose own little pain and hurt vanities do not matter so much, he who does not think constantly, if I show my affection or my true feelings, what will people think? I might be hurt or I might jeopardize something. He who truly gives himself up or gives up his life, he does not hold on to himself so tightly, and thus he will receive life again and again in the spiritual sense. He will find harmony within by going with the law, and he must find love and respect from others. He could never find by holding on to himself so fast. What I just read is really, really important. I'm not going to reread it. I'm going to keep going. Therefore, it is of utmost importance on the spiritual path to learn to give up one's life in the true meaning, and that entails also to be able to accept pain. And misunderstood application of positive thinking leaves out this entire chapter of spiritual development. The next time, my dear friends, I will talk about how we spirits see the human being, the whole unit of human personality, and how this affects the process of purification, or the path of perfection, or psychological therapy, or whatever you want to call it. I want to give you the spiritual angle on this subject, and I wish to inform you that my next lecture will also take place in English so that more of you can profit by it. And we shall see if we shall have a lecture in German again or not. Well, I guess they did it in German. Before I turn to your questions, I would like you, my friends, from next time on to arrange a little organization as far as the question period is concerned. Oh, I don't know what this is about, but all right, here's a question. Question number 1. If, for instance, I want to ask something pertaining to the foregoing lecture, I would not know it before. Answer: that is quite right. You will have the opportunity to ask spontaneous questions pertaining to the foregoing lecture. Before I turn to the planned questions, I will ask all of you if there's anything about the preceding lecture you would also like to ask. Question: why should an answer to our doubts come as an anticlimax? Answer: I will tell you why. When man expects answers from God, from the spirit world, he somehow imagines that this must happen in a very dramatic way, or even melodramatic, some sort of miracle. And yet, this is not the way God works. God works through you, through other human beings. And the answers granted seem to happen so naturally that at the moment you may even be uncertain whether there was an answer. There is also a very good reason for this. In fact, a number of reasons. One reason is that the highest state of happiness and grace, the experience, the fact of the existence of the other world and its closeness to you, must not be made too easy. Man has to be tested and tested again and again, whether he is worthy of living in truth constantly. In short, man has to work for this. He has to keep his eyes open, his inner feelings and perceptions turned to the spirit world. He must not take it for granted. He must train these senses by observation and awareness. Thus he works upwards with everything given to him from the spirit world. And this is the way it should be. But if he meets it properly, the result will be infinitely better. He will not be sustained by some outer happening or experience, but from the strength and the wisdom he has developed within. And thus he will find constant strength and happiness that is built on a rock and can never be pulled out from under his feet anymore. Thus, the answers happen in a worldly way, almost as though by chance, so naturally and not supernaturally. And this is why it seems like an anticlimax. And if you're not sure, take this uncertainty. Voice your question clearly and ask for truth. Ask whether this was an answer or not. You will receive it again without a shadow of a doubt. Alas, it rarely occurs to people, even those who are accustomed to pray, to turn to God with all these little problems and uncertainties. You are prone to let these uncertainties, unformulated in your feelings, create a disorder in your soul. All these unclarified conflicts, big or small, they weaken you. Therefore, it would be very advisable to always turn to God with all things where you are uncertain. Ask for enlightenment. Ask for truth. Ask for his will when a decision is to be made. You will thus reach the state we are always talking about, and that you are longing for much, much sooner. Let me just read that last part because this is it. You will reach the state we are always talking about that you are all longing for much, much sooner. And that is the majority of Lecture 13. Ciao.